Welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. If you're a creative thinker with an unconventional approach to your industry, you just might be a happy disruptor. Join your friends at the Great Outdoors Foundation for honest conversations about tackling critical issues like conservation with an uncritical disposition. If you like to smile and get things done, this is the podcast for you.
Hello, and welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. I'm Katie.
And I'm Hannah.
And we're so excited to have you hear from today's guest. But before we jump into the episode, we do just want to say a very special thank you to the team at Scheels for sponsoring today's episode. We have been longtime partners with Scheels and just so glad to have them on board with the podcast. So thanks so much, Scheels. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben Gleason. Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much, Hannah and Katie, for having us here. Ben Gleason, Director of Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council. So obviously we'll be talking about the council's work, but I was born and raised in Charles City, Iowa, Northeast Iowa. There's a big billboard on the way into town, America's hometown, also the birthplace of the tractor. My family still has... we have a cabin on the river, the Cedar River back home, and a couple farms as well. So I grew up hunting and fishing at the cabin and the farm. Got a degree in ecology from Iowa State University, so always been doing natural resource work. So here at NREC, we are focused on reducing nitrogen and phosphorus loss to improve water quality.
So speaking of NREC, that's Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council. It was formed as a direct response to the adoption of the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization's history and how it's evolved over the last 10 years?
Right. So it was formed shortly thereafter the strategy was formally adopted in 2013. I'd have to go back and look when the bylaws and all that were officially, but it was like 2014, 2015 where officially we're rolling. Originally, the whole thought process from creating the council was we want everyone involved in sort of the nitrogen, phosphorus, fertilizer supply chain involved. So we started with manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, crop advisors, and farmers are all involved in the organization. It's Iowa Farm Bureau, Iowa Corn, and Iowa Pork from the farmer side to the Agribusiness Association of Iowa and representing all of those agribusinesses. So we still have a heavy emphasis on that today. Certainly the ag retailers and crop advisors, but we also have 5 farmers on our executive board. So they are the customer of those businesses. So we want to make sure that what we're doing in this realm works for everybody. More recently, we changed our board structure a little bit. We created an executive board and an advisory board, and kind of changed sort of the dues structure just for some base funding for our work. So of course, Great Outdoors Foundation is one of our advisory board members amongst, I think we have 8 total advisory board members and 4 executive board members. And then we have Iowa State University and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship as ex officios.
Great.
And earlier this year, Ben, we had Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig on the podcast to give us a crash course on the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. But for listeners who maybe didn't tune in for that episode or need to get reacquainted, can you give us some of the key points of what's included in the Nutrient Reduction Strategy?
Sure. We run across folks that need to be reminded of what the nutrient reduction strategy is all along, because it is 13 years old. And
who among us,
other
right?
things have popped up since then, like worldwide pandemics and such. But Mike mentioned it was formally adopted in 2013, and it really was a shift in sort of our agricultural natural resource management from soil erosion, dating back to the Dust Bowl, decades or almost, 70, 80 years ago, to an emphasis more on the water side. We still, soil erosion is still very important to manage and reduce because that's how we lose phosphorus as well. But the water side is a completely different animal when you have water-soluble nitrate. and we have water moving, throughout our agricultural system. So how do we, like Mike said, slow it down and try to, prevent it from leaving the field? And the strategy is in response to the Hypoxia Task Force and their work to reduce the dead zone or hypoxia zone, low oxygen zone in the Gulf of Mexico or America, which I don't know what to call it.
In the Gulf.
The Gulf, yes. And that task force is a federal and state partnership. So 16 states and then all the federal agencies that deal with water. And then Iowa has had a very much leading role in the task force from the beginning. Bill Northey was the co-chair representing the states, and now Mike continues that role representing the states. And the goal there was it can't be a heavy-handed federal approach to try and manage the Mississippi River Basin, which covers portions of 32 states and part of Canada. Mm-hmm. So it was more let the states do what they know works best for their land, their climate, their culture, if you will. So Iowa was one of the first states to develop a plan, and then we got to work right away as far as the science assessment, which really was unprecedented at the time, evaluating all the practices that could potentially reduce phosphorus and nitrogen. How do they perform? For example, cover crops reduce nitrogen and phosphorus by 30%. Other practices are single digits. Edge of field practices are multiple double digits. So that suite helps every farmer decide which works best for their field, as every field is different. And I just looked this morning, northwest Iowa, Larchwood, low of 41 tonight. Keokuk in southeast Iowa will be a low of 53. So that's 12 degrees difference. And I'm guessing, 10 to 15 inch difference in yearly precipitation from western Iowa to eastern Iowa. So that that alone is why we want to be flexible for farmers and what they're doing in their fields. And then another point Mike made is really a holistic approach to point and non-point, which has never been done before, bringing those together.
Yeah.
And we've done some work with credit trading where a wastewater treatment plant could be cheaper to meet their permit requirements by working upstream instead of building a hundreds of millions of dollars new facility. So that part was new, but it's turned out very well. And certainly there's things that don't apply to either side, but they also learn from each other as well.
So NREC, in helping to support the nutrient reduction strategy, has 3 primary delivery systems. They have progress measurements, new tech development and validation, and education and outreach. Can you explain a little bit how you're using each of these to advance the mission?
Right. Our progress measurement is really our flagship. We're wrapping up our 9th year of a survey of ag retailers. So we randomly select 150 locations, co-ops, elevators across the state. They're statistically weighted. We randomly select more locations where there are more row crop acres. So north central Iowa, we're going to have more than, say, the hills of northeast Iowa or southern Iowa. So 150 locations. We try to visit all of them. That's not possible. Some people don't like to do surveys. Sometimes we have a hard time just finding the right person at the location. Ultimately, we end up with, our goal is 500 statewide surveys. We usually get around 800 or 900 surveys. So from that work, we can see, and we're limited to practices that an ag retailer is going to know about. So cover crops, tillage, and nutrient management, which is a lot. But we have, almost 9 years of data now. We can see, what practices are trending upwards, what practices were already, at a high rate of adoption. So those sorts of things we don't really need to spend a lot of resources on versus those that maybe aren't getting quite the traction that we want. So that's one way we support this strategy via the survey, technology, validation and development. There have been multiple practices added to the science assessment, bioreactors, saturated buffers, blind inlets, oxbow wetlands. All those practices are new as far as nutrient reduction potential. Currently, we're working with Iowa State on looking at nitrification inhibitors. Originally, the strategy only recognized one inhibitor. More recently, we kind of found enough water quality data to add another product. And then this study is looking at 2 or 3 more additional products. And part of our survey, we see that, even though early on in the survey, we only recognized N-Serve, we see today farmers using, half a dozen different products, but they're not necessarily recognized.
Yeah.
We hope that they will be, but that's not guaranteed either. Just because it improves yield or something doesn't necessarily mean there's a water quality benefit, and that's can be difficult to prove, but that's part of our role is facilitating that. And then, outreach. Again, we're very ag retailer, crop advisor focused. We do webinars and videos and really, again, focus on the retailers. They're the ones selling the products, advising the farmer. And then this spring we did a nitrogen soil sampling project to help farmers and crop advisors and retailers get a better sense of what residual nitrogen is in the soil. So when they're looking forward to side dressing here in the next month or so, they can take that credit, if you will, and adjust their rate accordingly. So lots of different stuff. And sometimes I feel like we can identify a gap and find a partner or someone to work with to fill that gap and just keep things moving.
Yeah. How'd that soil sampling, do you think it informed, and did people change their behavior based on what they saw?
I think it's a little too early to tell. I think some folks would just like free soil sampling, sign me up. Others are like, very analytical and like, I can use this to do, adjust our side dress. Others, I think, are just curious.
Yeah.
All good. It's all educational. So whatever your perspective is, we want to help you understand the nitrogen cycle and how that affects your nitrogen management, and really just have people be more adaptive managers than putting it all at once in the fall and being done. This way they can think about multiple timings, multiple rates, what's their total rate, how does the weather and economics affect all that. So,
Because am I correct here that like there's a finite amount of nitrogen that like corn can use, and so really once you get to a certain point, there's no additional benefit. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Nitrogen Initiative has even seen a yield decrease with about 15% of the trials, where at a certain point, adding more nitrogen actually decreased yield. And they kind of think that maybe the plant becomes lazy because there's so much nitrogen there that it's not putting roots down.
Yeah.
And so water availability or something else is dinging the yield, not nitrogen availability. So yeah, they're doing statistical things to, draw the curve and identify the economic optimum on what that rate should be for not necessarily the biggest yield, but the biggest profit.
Right. Net profitability
Yes.
versus yield. Yeah, we've had that conversation a couple times. I want to go back to one other thing because we have such a variety of listeners that and people that watch at different levels of ag literacy. Talk about nitrogen inhibitors and what they do.
Yeah, so they can be applied. There's multiple products. They're for different purposes. We have inhibitors for fall anhydrous or fall manure, which basically keeps that nitrogen that's applied in a stable form. And I'll leave it at that, so it doesn't leach throughout the year. Same with spring applied. There are inhibitors or stabilizers for that. So if you apply some in early spring, it'll keep it in a form that's not quite as mobile until the plant can use it a couple months later even in season, there's ones, if you're sort of dribbling a nitrogen product on the surface, there's concern about volatilization where it would just, some of it would evaporate. And so there are stabilizers that help prevent that as well. So some of them inhibit an enzyme that bacteria use to convert the nitrogen to different forms. That's sort of the basics. But yeah, they just kind of help keep things from moving too far.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super fascinating. So going to jump ahead to a question regarding some of the trends since we're already digging into the data. I think that is so fascinating. And with almost a decade of historical data to compare to, I'm sure you're starting to see some trends and insights. What are you noticing from those survey participants? And is there anything that would be particularly interesting related to the nutrient reduction strategy?
Yeah. First off, there are no straight lines in this data. It's, you know, especially, 9 years. We've had some very wet years early on in the survey. More recently, dry years, economic turmoil, all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
This stuff conservation doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Everyone wants to do good, but that's not always possible because it costs money. And then the other important factor is what years are we comparing? We have the baseline for the strategy is 1980 to 96. That comes from the Hypoxia Task Force. So farming in the 80s, much different than today. We have the strategy came out in 2013. That's often a point that we try to compare to. The survey didn't start till 2017, and then you get to today, or actually the most recently completed survey was 2024. We'll have 2025 soon, et cetera. So those are, things to consider when we're looking at trends or whatever. So cover crops, for example, we had about 6.9% of the fields in the first year of the survey. So if you look back at the 80s, it was probably even lower than that. The start of the strategy in 2013 was probably much lower than that. 2017, there started to be more incentives. And then 2024, our last completed year, was 16.7. So more than doubled. That's a good trend. But if you look at the last 3 years, we're our rate of increase is sort of flattening out for a variety of reasons we can talk about if you want.
Yeah, that would be it. So some of that is probably related to, cost share, maybe availability.
Yeah,
or
I think, especially since 2020, it's just all sorts of weird stuff. 2020, we had a flush of assistance from the feds. There was a prevent plant program that would encourage cover crops. And we started having the climate smart projects coming, which I'm not sure if that helped or hurt nutrient reduction practices because everyone was worried about climate change and doing the climate smart projects. Well, the water quality folks are like, well, there's overlap between them, but not necessarily. So that kind of drew some attention away from us or some focus. You had supply chain issues with the pandemic. So do we have enough herbicide to terminate or herbicide availability to terminate a cover crop? And then we had, the dry years. Talked to many a farmer who were worried, if I'm going to invest in the seed, it better germinate, but there's no guarantee if you throw a bunch of seed out there and it doesn't rain in the fall. And then it's not doing any good except wasting money. But now we're getting back, I don't know, for normal, whatever weather that is. But
we're having some rain.
Yeah. So, and then in the meantime, cost share programs are evolving and we're trying to meet their needs. Cover crop acres, are still increasing. That puts a pressure on seed supply. Back home, there's a guy that sells cover crop seed and I saw he had a little ad at the local gas station looking for growers to help him grow more seed. And I ran into him one day, and he's like, yeah, I'm having trouble finding folks that just, want to grow cover crop seed instead of corn and beans. So the demand for the seed was there. He was trying to increase the supply.
Yeah.
So all that sort of stuff makes it difficult to just be like, well, why didn't we go up or down, and then, of course, weather as well. I talked a little bit about that, which kind of brings me to this, the next trend I was going to talk about, fall anhydrous. We asked that question specifically so we can ask, do you do fall anhydrous ammonia, and then do you use an inhibitor with that? But the fall anhydrous trends I kind of just anecdotally, I'm like, the weather changed, and I could kind of see some similarities. So 2018 and 19, about 24% of the fields used fall anhydrous. They could have also done a spring or an in-season app, or it was all in the fall, whatever. That number rose to 50% in 22 and 23.
Interesting.
So you would be like, we're going backwards, a lot.
Yeah.
But if you look back, think what I thought was, okay, those falls were really wet in 1819. I remember talking to farmers, record log chain breakage this fall because equipment's getting stuck. I remember pheasant hunting their standing corn, Thanksgiving. Yes. And it's really hard to put on fall anhydrous in December. So, so it's those sorts of things. But then if you look, so it's not that we went backwards, it was just so wet then. And then you think about 22 and 23, it was dry. You could do as much field work as you want in the fall. Yeah. Because harvest was early. And then you look bookends just outside of those. 2017, it was 39%. 2024, it was 42%. So up a little. The 8-year average is 37.5. So, I mean, if you take out the wet years and the dry years, we're pretty much flat. Yeah. So I just thought that was, when I was first looking at that data, I'm like, I remember those falls.
So tell me, to me that would signal that there wasn't necessarily a behavior change.
Right.
Right?
Either way, yeah.
What are some of the things that are affecting us from being able to make the benefit changes that would be positive to the nutrient reduction strategy? Or maybe a better question is how do we overcome that?
Yeah. Obviously, economics and funding, financial assistance, those are always big things. I think we underestimate generally what these cost to a farmer to implement. Not just, the price of seed for cover crops, but, what are, the farmer taking time to redevelop his pest management plan, or all those different things that don't necessarily show up in your crop budget, but they do take time or money or energy. So that's one thing we need to think about. And then sort of risk aversion. Yeah. Our farm has been successful for 3 generations, and you want us to flip it upside down?
Yeah. Which is an interesting conversation to be having now, right?
Yes.
Because with sort of the state of all of the things, right? Yeah. Supply chain availability, which we're kind of having round 2 of that coming up. Markets that, come and go. We touched on this briefly, or you did, about, looking at net profitability as opposed to yield. So what does it take? Is it middle infrastructure? Is it, because there's this whole conversation that's happening within the world that helps to support this, whether it's through the federal government, the state government, philanthropy, finance, or all of them together. We've been focused on direct payments to farmers or direct cost share, but ultimately, probably the market's going to have to support that, right?
Exactly.
So how do we get there?
Yeah. The market thing is probably the most important, but also the most difficult.
Right.
People talk about, why don't we grow more oats? Well, there's not a market.
Right.
You can't just create a market necessarily. I mean, the Cedar Rapids has their long, the oats that Quaker Oats use, they have long time suppliers wherever, Canada, whatever. But so the market thing has huge potential, but is probably the most difficult. I think one thing that I hear a lot from farmers is how do we make it easier, not just financially, but how do we, the batch and build is a perfect example.
Right.
But how do we take that model for like cover crops?
Yeah.
If you're in this watershed or this county, you just sign up and it's taken care of for you.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about it in the fall. Mm-hmm. But we got to find someone who's not busy in the fall to plant all those cover crop acres, and arrange the seed, and then the farmer still has to worry about termination. So how do we, where's sort of the, not technical assistance per se, but
labor
logistical
assistance. Yeah.
Doing that for farmers, because I've heard from farmers, I want to try cover crops. I start rattling off acronyms and cost share programs.
Yeah, right.
No. I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
I just want to get it done.
Yeah.
Where do I start? And those sorts of things. So those are the things we can, for cover crops, try to make easier. And like I said, the batch and build program, if we can, it's economies of scale, I guess, right? So if we can batch a bunch of farmers together for cover crops, or, talking about side dressing and in season, that takes special equipment. Not everybody has that.
Right.
So can someone do that for a batch of farmers or whatever? And they, because they have some scale, it'll be cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that the co-ops could come, if the investment was made at the co-op level, that would work?
I think so. I know Minnesota has like an equipment cost share program. TNC did, the Nature Conservancy did a sort of a small pilot this year in Northeast Iowa where they have a project going, and the money went like that.
Really?
And it was pretty broad. Like could have been any equipment, whether it's, precision ag, variable rate applications, or cover crop seeders, or anything of that nature. And, 50% cost share, whatever it may be, but they had way more applications than funding, which is the case.
That's a good signal for the market.
So it sounds like you are having conversations fairly often with farmers, and obviously from the survey, you have a lot of data. Do you have any formal way of collecting maybe the more like qualitative insights? Because I think what you touched on earlier, we can look at these general trends and numbers, but they don't necessarily tell the full story.
Right.
So that individual decision making is super interesting to kind of get inside the psyche of the individual farmers,
right.
And all of the factors that they're having to consider.
Yeah, I would say the Iowa Farm and Rural Life poll probably does that the best. It's about attitudes and sort of, trends in sort of thinking and or concerns. And they've been asking questions on and off throughout the years. Are you aware of the nutrient reduction strategy? I think, are you, how do you deal with resistant weeds? Those sorts of things. And certainly that's part of, our dashboard of stuff we're measuring is, the awareness and attitudes and knowledge that need to happen before we see practice change.
Yeah. So fascinating.
It
We could
is.
talk forever.
I know.
I almost was like, could you go through the nitrogen life cycle? But I was like, that would be a whole episode.
I'm afraid I would make a mistake.
We should find the right person to do the nitrogen
absolutely.
I
life cycle.
used to have a little graphic next to my desk of all these arrows and stuff, and yeah, it's confusing and it's really hard to manage as a farmer.
So, what is one thing that you wish people or everyone knew about the nutrient reduction strategy?
Everyone can play a role. It doesn't matter where you live, what you do, how big your yard is. Certainly agriculture, the scale of agriculture makes, farmers some of the more important players, but it's really all of us doing something different. And by doing something, I don't mean complaining or finger pointing. I mean doing something to try and help out.
Yeah. I think, honestly, I felt like I knew something about water quality before we started doing the podcast. And, the podcast is just an extension of the conversations we're already having. But I feel like I've learned so much and how nuanced, like, the entire cycle is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could have a podcast on the nitrogen life cycle. We could have a podcast on the yield versus net profitability discussion, right? We could probably have like an old school, like Lincoln Douglas style debate on that, right?
Yeah, and even, the nitrogen cycle, you would have to break that up into,
Right.
A whole season, 10 episode season of the different arrows in the cycle.
Right.
Wow.
It's not, you think the water cycle is pretty simple. You have 3 forms and that's about it. And the ice one doesn't move much.
Yeah.
Exactly. Pretty
Versus the
stagnant.
nitrogen, you have, I don't know how many different forms, and you have gas and you have solid and you have soluble, and then you have plants and animals. And
Depending on what you're ingesting it with and,
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
things, it changes. Yes.
Yeah.
We've learned a little bit about that this year.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Ben, what would you say is like the most commonly asked question, or maybe biggest misconception about the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy?
The biggest driver of nutrient loss is annual row cropping. They grow from April to, at best, September, and then the rest of the year. The soil, depending on the weather and soil temperature and stuff, the bacteria are still doing stuff. They're still breaking down organic matter. So that is the driver. The science assessment shows we can still maintain, our annual cropping sort of powerhouse, if you will, the biggest producer of corn, second biggest producer of soybeans, by adopting these various practices and reduce nitrogen and phosphorus by 45% with the help from the point sources. So that's the driver. Tile often gets caught up into that. There's only roughly a quarter of our row crops are tile drained, 8-9 million acres, most of it in the north central area. So it gets blamed a lot. You think if there's a hill, you don't need tile. There's, the water will move with gravity. So tile, I think, gets unfairly blamed.
Interesting.
But the good thing about tile, obviously, besides its the way it supports crop growth, is that outlet is an opportunity for our edge of field practices.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey,
there's a funnel.
Because even without tile, there's still subsurface flow.
Right.
Whether it's through sandy soil or whatever. Even with tile, if the water goes below the tile, it can still move. We're surprisingly still trying to figure some of that stuff out because we've just assumed it hits the tile and that's the extent of how our water moves, but that's not necessarily true in all cases. So that's the big one, I think, and that's why we have edge of field practices. It's why we have in-field practices. So, and then also related to that is farmers are not grossly mismanaging nitrogen. Sure, there are instances where they may apply more than the crop needs. We don't know what the crop needs necessarily. Even the nitrogen initiative from year to year, we see, variability from field to field within a field as far as what the crop needs as the economic optimum. The analogy I use, farmers are not backing the nitrate truck up to the creek and just dumping nitrates in.
Right.
Or the fertilizer they apply, 25% doesn't instantly run off. We are there's some of that nitrogen we apply will be bound in the crop residue, the corn stalks and leaves, for perhaps several years, and then eventually decompose and then get used by, that crop several years down the road. So it's really difficult to say that molecule of nitrogen you applied in the fall of whatever was the molecule that ran down the river, because it could be immobilized several different ways, or it could be used by the crop. So it's, again, the nitrogen cycle is very complex.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, for those that are outside of Iowa, we have been warned that we will be having another usage ban. And that's not because of water quantity. We have plenty of water, but it's because our denitrification plant cannot keep up to produce enough clean drinking water if people are also irrigating lawns and things like that. So we had high levels. The denitrification plants have been running since January. And there's some state activities of, investment and things that came out at the end of session. But I think it points to the complexity of the issue and some of the historic things that we probably need to overcome. But it's not a direct one-to-one correlation.
Right. And like everything else, there are no straight lines. We've had several years where the nitrate removal facility doesn't run at all, even during, our typical peak of, again, sort of this time of year before the crop is actively growing and using nitrogen, again, the annual row crop cycle. So several years without it running to
right,
almost running nonstop for a year.
Right.
So how do we make sure we have resiliency built in the system from the farm to the water plant? Because crazy things will happen, right?
Right.
Weather-wise or farm economics or who knows what.
Or all of them at once.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to 2026.
Yes.
Well, Ben, we like to close out every episode with a segment we call Let's Whiteboard It. Before we do that, is there anything else we haven't covered that you want listeners to know?
I don't think so. It's not as simple as we think. And the further we dig into it, especially the nitrogen side, and I've heard this from lots of folks, crop advisors, farmers, the more we learn, the more there's even more to learn after that. It raises more questions and than answers at some times. So, but the nitrogen initiative at Iowa State has really helped, I think, open people's eyes to really how complex it is and what other things we can take into account to be better managers of our fertilizer.
Well, I will give you this. So for our last segment, we have a random question. And so for today,
I don't know what it is either.
Hannah and Ben, I'm going to ask you guys to draw the nitrogen cycle. Just kidding. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I was a poli-sci journalism major.
No, I would not make you do that. No, my question for you is, obviously both of you are in this work very deeply and have been for many years. If you could tomorrow wave a magic wand and remove one barrier to conservation on the farm, just one, what would it be? I don't know if the whiteboard is going to be big enough.
Yeah.
We'll let you guys think through that. While Hannah and Ben are writing or drawing their responses, make sure to like and subscribe wherever you are listening. Check out the INREC website. They've got great resources there with some of the historic data that we have referenced in today's episode. And then one last thing, we are quickly approaching the 1-year anniversary of the Happy Disruptors podcast. So if you have questions or topics that you'd like us to address in a future episode, make sure to send those to marketing@greatoutdoorsfoundation.org, or you can always just comment them on one of our social posts. Have I given you guys enough time?
Yes.
All right, Ben, you want to kick us off?
Yes.
Okay.
So
You have your magic wand.
I have a magic wand, and while it may make life less interesting in Iowa, but if we could predict the weather 100% accurately, farmers' lives would be so easily, and they could precisely apply nitrogen when it's needed.
Wow.
So I drew a little rain
Oh,
cloud.
fantastic. Wow.
So you should have given me the blue one.
That's
I
really
know. I'm like, ooh, orange rain.
Not so good.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So you would say that is one of the biggest barriers to some of the progress. Yeah. Wow. Man, we got to get on that.
We do.
How do you reverse cloud seed? Just kidding. Okay. Hannah, how about you?
Okay. You guys are going to make fun of my drawing again. So I had to label it. So it says root beer, but it's the bottleneck of permitting.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I'm getting more entertaining with these, I think.
Yes.
So we did a little internal modeling that we have not talked about and haven't verified with scientific effort or experts, but we need to increase the number of wetlands by 17 times to get to the nutrient reduction strategy goals by 2040. And even if we had all the money in the world to be able to do that, we cannot really increase much more than what we're doing now because of the bottleneck of federal permitting. And so I can work on the money all day long and create great partnerships, but we really need to change that to make conservation easier and not as expensive.
Yeah.
That will be the soapbox I die on.
Yeah. And it's not just wetlands. As we're working on batch and build, saturated buffers and bioreactors, if the design creates a new outlet, we have to do some sort of notice of a new outlet to the Army Corps, which just delays everything. Even though any contractor in the state can lay tile and put a new outlet in anywhere without telling anyone. But to do a conservation practice that adds an outlet, we have to get permission. Does that make sense to anyone?
Or how wetlands are treated the same as on a already straightened stream that has been physically altered, and we're putting a wetland in it to restore it back to its natural, state, or at least more so.
Yeah.
And it is treated like a concrete parking lot.
Yeah.
That will be the hill I die on all day long.
Yes. Yeah.
Come to my TED Talk.
Hopefully, like the next time we have you on the podcast, we will have resolved. I don't know that we'll be able to do the weather prediction quite yet, but I think some of these others, we can hopefully start working with partners at the state and federal level to.
I think there is some hope though. When bioreactors and saturated buffers first came out, trying to put them in CRP was a nightmare. Like the farmer had to basically cancel portion of a CRP contract and pay back everything they had been paid over potentially 10 years. We've gotten past that, surprisingly.
Yeah.
And actually CRP funds bioreactors and saturated buffers now. So there is hope.
Yeah. Well, good. Thank you for ending this on a positive note.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
You can come to any podcast or meeting.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thank you very much.
And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.